we finished off actually talking about Wim Hof last time, and we didn't go into too much detail. You were very complimentary about Wim, but you said that there was the exact words I forget, but it was something like the breathing effect isn't his breathing technique isn't
breathing
the
technique
best.
Doesn't follow quantum principles. The quantum principles being the Bohr effect and the Haldane effect. So I don't really talk about Wim stuff too much. Why? Because I'm happy that he gets, especially people like you that are high latitude livers, to get to the cold. Why? Because the cold allows you to make light from your mitochondrial DNA, which is called biophotons. So as long as you do that, and you know not to pay attention to his musings about science because he's not a scientist, I'm okay with it.
Okay, so the breathing technique itself, is it doing any harm, do you think? Is there any dangers in doing the technique, or are we pretty good to go?
I don't think it's doing you any harm. I think, to be honest with you, once you understand the key metrics, once you understand like breathing is an electromagnetic phenomenon, most people don't even know that. I know Wim doesn't know that, because if he did, he would not teach his breathing technique. Why is that the case? Because the mitochondria, if you have my fingers here, this is the beginning of mitochondria, NAD. This is oxygen here. Oxygen pulls electrons across this because it's electronegative, meaning that it has a need for 2 more electrons to fill its outermost shell. This stuff right here is the intermitochondrial membrane that has all the cytochromes on it. But the one that's right next to oxygen is called the ATPase. The ATPase makes ATP, but it's got a very interesting head on it called an FO head that spins. And one of your old countrymen from 1850, you may have heard of, Michael Faraday, said that anytime you have a current going through a wire, it induces a magnetic field. Well, that magnetic field is what makes that FO head spin. And it turns out that oxygen is paramagnetic, meaning that it's drawn to things with magnetic fields. So believe it or not, because that thing spins is the reason why oxygen goes to the end of the electron chain. So most people don't get into that sophistication. But what does that tell you? It tells you that breathing is quantized to our oxygen level. So when somebody goes and tells you, oh, this is the way you should breathe, and it's wrong, you can imagine a guy like me is probably going to, shit the bed a little bit. But in terms of the way Wim talks about it, I don't think he's inducing any big problems, especially if it's for people in Europe. Why? Because the people in Europe that get this the best are probably the Russians, the Scandinavians, because they make part of cold thermogenesis, their life. Unfortunately, the only people that can get close to that maybe is the people in the UK if they live around Bath, but the problem is the UK won't let you go in the Roman baths anymore. They're all walled off, but you can set something up for yourself, at home to do that. And basically, when you go in the cold water, what is the real goal? The goal is for you to create really good light from your mitochondria. That light is the light that actually gets you stronger. So my personal belief is I don't really care how you breathe when you do it, as long as you use it if it's something you need. And most people that live at high latitude, that live in Europe, need it because of the amount of EMF that they have in their environment.
Okay. We've got a quite a nice connection, you and I, through Rick Rubin, because I obviously know Rick, but Rick was on the Huberman podcast about a year ago. And when he went on there, he actually came on with his phone and he said to Huberman, I'd like to do a breathing exercise with you. And it was one of my tracks off my YouTube channel. It's called Heart Coherence Breathing. Are you familiar with that heart coherence breathing? What are your thoughts on those sort of techniques?
Again, same thing I would tell you about Wim. Anything that it's not quantized to the environment you're in, I'm going to have a problem with. But anything that is great. For example, when you talk about that type of breathing technique, if it gets you into an alpha rhythm or a delta rhythm, those things are going to be good. But remember, when we meditate, and this is what people don't really understand, you're actually switching from using the TCA cycle, which is where we make the most energy, where the FO head spins the most. That's 9,000 protons going through it. That's actually when you need the most oxygen. When you're in a relaxed state or a pre-sleep state or a meditative state, your ATP goes slower. So the breathing technique also needs to go slower. But the interesting part of that people don't realize, that's when you actually shift into a more hypoxic pathway, what we like to call aerobic glycolysis, which at least in Europe and the United States goes by another name that's more famous called the Warburg shift. And the Warburg shift gets a bad rep from, the food gurus in the United States and the biochemists in the United States. I don't know how it is over in Europe, but most people don't get told that there's tissues in you that normally use a Warburg metabolism when you're alive and awake. What are those areas? The fovea of the eye, which is where central vision comes from, and also your gonads. That's in women's ovaries and in your balls. And the reason why is any place that has to make cells very, very quickly tends to use a Warburg metabolism. And the reason why is glucose metabolism through a Warburg shift occurs about 100 times faster than it would if you use another pathway. And that's kind of important. The downside of that is it creates more reactive oxygen species, which obviously isn't good. So that's why the human brain, when it gets Warburg shifted, say when you're looking at a cell phone too long or you're looking at a screen too long, your brain begins to use lactate. And lactate is chosen for one reason and one reason only, because it decreases the ROS. When I say a ROS to a guy like you that talks about breathing, this may blow your mind, but this is the reason why many of the people who talk about breathing don't know shit about metabolism, because ROS is a function of how you breathe. So remember, the more you breathe, the more ROS you make. And that's a problem. How did we see this in COVID? Just to finalize this, because I've said this on many podcasts, it's not too controversial in the United States. It might be controversial in Europe, but the reason why we killed so many people in hospitals is because we put a breathing tube down their throat during COVID. And what's the problem? The problem is the FiO2 that we're giving people is much higher than you would normally get. And when it's too high, what do? You create the ROS. And what does that do? It creates organ damage in other places. And, when you have doctors making this mistake, all over the world in Western medicine, I can't get on your case, and I can't get on Wim Hof's case about that too much. But I want people to understand, because I do think it's important, that your breathing technique should marry up to the environment that you're at. Why? Because let's just, for argument's sake, say you're doing a breathing treatment and you're in London and they put you in, a salt-infused relaxation tub, but it's blue lit. Yeah, that's a problem, because the blue light causes a huge problem for your mitochondria. Warburg shifts you. So the way in which you breathe needs to come down. Well, if you espouse a breathing technique that breathes faster, do you see how the mismatch would cause a problem? And the problem is the sophistication of people that give this advice. They do it, I think at a spa level, but not at a scientific level. And the reason it drives me crazy is because, when I unretired and went back into the hospitals to teach doctors how not to kill people with endotracheal tubes, this was the lesson that I actually used. And I actually showed them how to do this without harming people, because most people don't need a breathing tube when they had COVID. Why? Even when their SAT rates came down, because that little thing that everybody has probably seen when people go into the hospital called the O2 saturation rate, it's not accurate when you have methemoglobin present in you. And most people that had COVID did have methemoglobin. So if you're using a tool that doesn't measure accurately, like when somebody is 86, 87%, the doctor is trained from medical school and residency, we need to do something for their breathing because they can't breathe well. And what did they default to? The first thing they did is they put oxygen masks on or nasal cannulas. And what did I just tell you? Your body has amazing wisdom in it. Get out of its way and let it do its own thing. You don't need to do any shit to create a problem. And unfortunately, many people do that. And, just so we finish this lesson, because I think it's important, just think about the functional medicine doctors, or, what I would call the holistic doctors. that tell you, hey, let's use ozone or let's use hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Think about what I just told you about this situation. Do you think that's really good if you don't have an idea of what's really going on at the mitochondrial level and how fast that ATPase is spinning? And this is the reason why. I just did a podcast with a doctor from Australia where I kind of outed him pretty bad about this issue because he said, well, I treat all my diabetics like that. And I'm going, well, dude, if you do that in Australia, I would not send one patient to you because that is about the most dangerous thing you could do because it's clear you don't understand it. And the reason why I called the doctor out and I won't call you out or I won't call Wim out is because people are coming to you at a spa level. Like, let's relax, let's chill out, let's forget about the shit that's going on in Europe. It's not about, hey, doc, I can't breathe. I've got, an infection from RSV or something else. That's two totally different sets of, situations. But the reason why this discussion I think is important for your audience is I want them to know why I'm a stickler about these things. Because remember, my job as an MD is to know all those basics in and out. So when I say the things I say to you, know that I have a context for it and why I believe what I believe, because I understand the science probably better than anybody you'll ever have on this station.
Just pausing Jack for a sec. I felt so bad recording that in my artificial light studio. I thought I need to record this bit at least with my shirt off, Kruse style. So just to let you know, below this video is a link below this podcast, and in there it will take you to our breath bundle. It's 7 professionally recorded breathing exercises which you can download offline. So if you're into Kruse, you're into breathwork, you're probably not a massive fan of Wi-Fi and ads and all that sort of stuff, and so you can get these exercises, save them onto your phone or your device, and they're offline forever, so you can listen to them wherever you want without any Wi-Fi connection. And just to be completely frank, when you sign up for it, the very next page will talk about our coaching program and how you can work with me and my team to use breath work to really transform your life and go so much deeper than just breathing exercises. Really look at a plan that's bespoke for you. So if that's of interest to you, you can click that link, and if not, take those 7 exercises and have a ruddy good day. Or I'm going to get a little bit more sun, and here's me in the studio with the conversation with Jack. Let me know in the comments any questions you've got, and we'll try and do a part 3 with him as well. All right, cheers. Yeah. No, I love that. So are you generally, and please correct me here, is it about just slowing down then? Is that because that's what Rick's doing? Rick was down to like 5.5 breaths, and he said his heart rate variability increased when he went down. So are we saying that really the fast stuff is not as good and we want to just people from a spa level? Is it just about slowing down?
No, it's not. And see, Rick, since he's one of my members, he knows the deal. It turns out that the ambient light environment is the key to the oxygen tension that you need. And this is something that everybody really makes a mistake on. So you have to know a little bit of evolutionary history. So there's this event that you've probably heard of a long time ago. It's called the Great Oxygenation Event. One of your countrymen, Nick Lane at University College London, has written extensively about this. He's written a book about this event. And he also has written another book about mitochondria called Power, Sex, and Suicide. I would tell any of your audience to go read those 2 books by Lane, because in there, it's the key part of the story and the question you just asked me. It turns out in that event, things happen on Earth for us to go from 1% to 21% oxygen we are today. So everybody assumes that because there's 21% oxygen, like in El Salvador and Europe where you are now, that, oxygen's never an issue. Well, it turns out that's not true, because it turns out from this great oxygenation event, hemoglobin can only carry oxygen when it's in the +2 state. Hemoglobin can't carry oxygen when it's +3. Do you know what changes the oxidation state of all heme proteins? Light. So guess what? The light you're in actually selects for the metabolic pathway you have. So this is the reason why the food gurus and the biochemists make big mistakes. And this is the reason why I don't want you to make the mistake. Rick knows that light and oxygen are linked through this event, so he knows what to do. In fact, if you listen to the podcast that I did with Rick, he also talked about when he had to have heart surgery and they put him on bypass, we actually used a medication on him called methylene blue. Why did we do that? Methylene blue has a very interesting phenomena where it actually changes +3 hemoglobin to +2 hemoglobin. So what does that mean? It means while he was on bypass, he was able to reoxygenate his blood without having to worry about the cardiovascular surgeon shocking him. Why did I mention that to Rick during that podcast? Well, you know that Rick is he's got a lot of master tapes in his head, and I was trying to protect the melanin sheets in his ear so that he wouldn't have any brain damage from being placed on a cardiopulmonary bypass machine. So this is why that's important, and Rick knows this stuff. So, for example, if you are out in the sun like I am here, I would tell you breathing down, like you said, perfectly okay to do. But if you're, say, in central London and they've got artificial light, LED light that's present in Europe, no, that may not be the wisest thing for you to do. So I would tell you, when you do your meditation, my opinion, it should always be done either in the sun or complete darkness, no light at all. And if you do that, then you don't have to worry about the oxygenation effect. Then you can breathe down and you'll be fine. But if you have ambient light on, I don't care what it is, even if it's fire, it has an effect.
What are your thoughts on CO2 therapy as opposed to oxygen, the hyperbaric oxygen chambers? There's now this whole other almost fringe side of like CO2 therapy for like diabetic feet, and it was used hundreds of years ago apparently on breast cancer. So do you have any thoughts or input on CO2 therapy?
It's the same story that I'm telling you right now on the oxygen side. Remember, these are like a spider on a mirror doing this. Why would I tell you that? Oxygen is the terminal electron acceptor. What does mitochondria make through the process of metabolism? CO2 and water. And it turns out that's the reason why CO2 is there. And what do we know? We know that diabetics, we know people that have diseases, their mitochondrial reserve isn't as good. So if the mitochondrial reserve isn't as good, you don't make as much CO2. So what are these people trying to do? They're trying to infuse CO2 into you to actually improve mitochondrial function. But it's like an equalizer button. Like if Rick was here and said, we're just going to change this one button on the amplifier, do you think that's going to be good enough to get the sound you want? No, you have to do everything together so it's quantized. And this is the problem that I tried to explain to you earlier. When you don't understand what quantized means, it means the amount of oxygen, CO2, water production, and light all are precise. And they're so precise that when you have somebody come in doing stuff that makes it imprecise, you're actually hindering the process. So the better thing for you to do is to do your breathing treatments in the sun or in the dark, and guess what? Your mitochondria will figure out exactly what needs to happen. And the truth be told, if you want to improve your mitochondrial function the most, spend more of your time in this environment, less of your time in your environment. That's really the big answer that Rick got, from me through all his mito hacks, and he's been working with me for over 15 years.
I'd like to get your thoughts a little bit on preventative medicine. So are you familiar with Dr. Peter Attia's work? Have you come across this chap on the internet? And he's talking about like regular colonoscopies and full body scans, which have radiation in and these sort of things. What are your thoughts on these? Because on one hand, the doctors in the UK saying, just wait till you get sick. And when you've got symptoms, then we'll step in. But then we seem to have this emerging medicine field now. It's like you need to be getting checked all the time, especially when you get above 40. So I would love to get your thoughts on some of that.
Yeah, this will be an interesting topic. Pretty much Peter and I are 180 degrees opposite each other. He is a centralized doctor. I'm a decentralized doctor. I do agree in preventative medicine, but the preventative medicine that I aspire to is not the preventative medicine that Peter aspires to. This is preventative medicine for the reasons I just mentioned to you. I'm looking to optimize light, water, and magnetism. Why? Because those are the things that your mitochondria pay attention to. When you stick a colonoscopy scope up someone's behind, you're addressing and giving them blue light in their colon. That's generally not a good thing to do. Not only that, there's really no good data as far as I'm concerned, that it does anything for the incidence or prevalence of colon cancer. As a screening tool, it's good for people and doctors that are in the centralized business. Why? Because they get to wallet biopsy people after that. Many times people get biopsies done. And then the last part of that, the devastation of injuries from colonoscopies, these things can kill you. So you have to look at the risk-benefit ratio. And I just told you that the risk isn't good. So why would you think the benefit is there? I should say the benefit isn't good, so the risk isn't worth it. So for my opinion, on that specific test, I'm out. Peter Attia also, as a preventative thing, he thought that statins are a good idea. Uncle Jack is completely the opposite way. Statins are a bad idea. Why? Statins are a mitochondrial toxin. So remember my little diagram I did for you. This part here, it blocks the Q cycle between cytochrome 1, cytochrome 2, and cytochrome 3. Anytime you slow electron chain transport down, guess what? You're creating a problem. So most people who've probably done a cursory look at the internet will find out that people complain of cognitive haze. What does that mean? Your brain doesn't work as good when you take a statin. And the doctors are all on your case about, hey, your LDL cholesterol is too high. That's why they want to put you on a statin. Well, here's the funny part. The reason why your LDL cholesterol is too high is because what don't you do? You don't go out in the sun, because what does vitamin D come from? LDL cholesterol. So if your LDL cholesterol is up, it tells you that you're not connected to nature. So instead of giving somebody a drug, why don't you give them what they're really missing, which is they're light deficient? Now, that's a real problem if you live in London. Why? Because you guys don't get enough. And you've got another better preventative doctor than Peter Attia over there. His name is Richard Weller. He's a dermatologist, if you can believe that. He's in Glasgow, and he tells people that everybody in the UK needs to go out and get more sun. You guys are too white, and you don't make enough nitric oxide. Turns out, Dr. Weller is exactly right. Why? Because he knows that nitric oxide production can reduce your blood pressure. So he knows about those issues, and he knows that there's a link to vitamin D levels. So he's one of the good guys on the prevention side that's in the UK. What's the other test you wanted to ask me about?
So he I mean, he does a lot. He does a big blood panel. We look at, he looks at vitamin D and all sorts of different things in there. I mean, I did some of his tests in Poland, not through him, but my vitamin D came back very low. And after our first podcast, Dr. Kruse, I was out. I got sunburns actually after our first podcast, because I need to get outside more. And so I went to Mexico for a couple of weeks on honeymoon last year. I was out in the sun, and yet when I got back, my vitamin D was still extremely low. And so I'm not really sure how much more daylight I can really chuck on my skin here in England. Be good to get you.
You got to remember, I'm more north of you. I come from 59th latitude. That's where my people are from, and I can stay outside for almost 12 hours a day. And here's what you don't understand. I'm going to give you a very simple idea that you probably went through, since you just told me you got married recently. So when your wife walks into the Louis Vuitton store and she tries on shoes and says, sweetheart, I can't buy them, they hurt my feet. And you say, well, just buy them, wear them in the house 5 times and you'll be fine, because you break them in. Turns out you have the same process in your skin. It's called the solar callus. And I've written a blog on Patreon about how you get your skin ready. So even people that are fair skinned like me, with German and Irish descent, who have freckles, can go out in the sun, 13 north latitude, and not worry about it. In fact, I'm going to tell you something that's interesting. When you are a whitey from the UK and you do go out and get a sunburn, it tells you that you have a solar deficiency. So let me explain to you something that's really, really interesting. There's another European doctor who's pretty good about light. His name's Alexander Wunsch. He's in Germany. And he's got slides that he shows. If you use red light, LED light, now I'm not a big fan of that, but I'll explain to you how this works, and you pre-treat your skin for 4 to 6 weeks, say before you go to Mexico, you'll never get burned, because it turns out that red light preconditions your skin for UV, so you won't get as red. So how does this really work in nature? Well, it should make sense to you. You probably have a job where you don't get up at sunrise. What we're designed to do, the first hour or two of sunrise, is almost all red light. So that's when you're supposed to be naked outside, because remember, like other mammals, unlike us, they don't have clothes, they don't have jobs, they don't have all these things, But remember, you're built for that framework, not for the framework of humans, okay? And that's what you have forgotten completely. So when you go and watch, the BBC and you see those wild animals, in Africa, remember, they're out as soon as the sun is out. You need to do the same thing, because guess what? That light is red. Then the golden hour, which happens before the sun sets, it's like 2 hours before, also a lot of red, not a lot of UV. So those are the two parts of the day where you want to be outside, preconditioning your skin. So then guess what? When you go, say, between 10 a.m. and 3 in the summertime, and the UV is out in Hyde Park, you're not going to turn, cherry red. And guess what? That's kind of what I do. And I've been doing that for over 20 years. And the whole issue about getting a sunburn, that immediately says to me, you do not understand how the solar callus works. Every mammal has the solar callus. The problem is not everybody teaches you how to do it. Why? Because Richard Weller's compatriots in the UK, any tan is dangerous. That's what they tell you. They say the same thing in the United States. They say the same thing in Australia and Canada. It's pseudoscience. It's bullshit. And you need to know it's bullshit. And I can prove to you, I can prove all to you right now why it's BS. Because you take the 3 big skin cancers, melanoma, squamous cell carcinoma, and basal cell. You know what the interesting thing is? When you go read the dermatology literature, if the sun was toxic, like they tell us, right? Everybody, from that logic, should have vitamin D's through the roof, right? But it turns out the people that get those 3 cancers have low vitamin D's. It's from a lack of sun. That's the real reason you get it. And what's the interesting thing, at least squamous cell and melanoma, they have a huge tie to indoor light, fluorescent light, LED light. That's the light that everybody in Europe uses. So guess what? How about we blame the right light? And then let's do this, my friend. When's the last time that you've seen modern humans outside for all hours of the day like you see animals in Africa? The answer is no. Why? Because we use stupid crap like this to bring us inside. So technology has brought us inside from outside. So when you think about the last 125 years on the planet, from when Tesla made the AC power grid, we've been making poor choices ever since. And if you really want to go back to your country, we call it the Victorian age. Why? Because women were covered from head to toe like modern Muslim women are, right? Well, guess what? That's a huge problem too. Because if your body's not fully exposed and you're only exposing your hands and your face, why in the hell would you ever think your vitamin D was going up? So this is the preventative medicine that I'm about. That's not the things that Dr. Attia talks about. In fact, he tells people that if you wear those Apple things in your ear, if you can do 100 push-ups, you're okay. That is total pseudoscience, total bullshit. And I could never get behind that. And to be honest with you, and this is a funny part. I don't know if Rick will ever admit to this, but Rick is friends with Peter and myself. And he goes and talks to Peter. Then I'm the last one he comes talk to. He goes, tell me this, that, and the other thing. And the stuff that happened with Rick in his heart, when I told Rick to use methylene blue because of that oxidation state change, he went back and talked to Peter. And you know what Peter said? That's crazy. He's a crazy neurosurgeon. Guess what happens 6 months after Rick's surgery? He comes back and tells Rick, he goes, you know what? That was pretty smart that he actually told you to do that. So this is what I would say to you and your audience. You have to vet your doctors really good. You have to find people who pack your parachute, because if you start to listen to the wrong people, you're going to make the wrong choices. And let me just tell you something. Centralized medicine, both in the United States and Europe, have killed more people than anything else out there. We specialize in giving bad advice. Why? Because we don't know the basics. And some of the basics we're talking about now, like just how the vitamin D cycle works. The big one is the one I just explained to you earlier when we talked about breathing. People don't realize this plus 2 to plus 3 oxidation change happens from light. And when you realize that now 99% of people live inside, they're in front of screens, you should go, wait a minute. What kind of effect is this happening on all of us? Does this affect like every organ in our body differently? And the answer is yes. Like, for example, you always see Peter Attia on his social media page working out in an indoor gym. That's about the stupidest thing you could ever do when you know that light can change your oxidation state from +2 to +3. Because what are you doing? You're working out in a hypoxic environment. That's good for your muscles, but do you think it's good for your brain? No. That's actually how you atrophy your brain. And you remember, Peter is not a brain surgeon. I am. So I know a lot more about this. And when he does his fancy little podcast, and he says to people, yeah, I don't understand why neurodegeneration and peripheral artery disease seem to be linked with heart disease. I just gave you the answer. It's because everybody he's dealing with are +3 shifted, and he doesn't know it. He doesn't know the basics. So when you ask me the loaded question, do I believe in preventative medicine? Yes. But we have to discuss what the preventative medicine is before you're going to lump me in with Peter Attia. And I'm going to tell you, if you lump me in with Peter Attia, you could probably figure out I ain't very happy about it.
Yeah. That makes sense. So let's take a look. I'm new to this in terms of the preventative stuff. I read Peter's book. Obviously, we've spoken before. So I'm a 40-plus-year-old. I've not had the healthiest first 40 years. I'm trying to redo some of it now. I drank a lot and smoked, all these different things. And so I guess there's part of me going, maybe I need to have the CT scan to see if there's any tumors or polyps or anything in me. How do you balance these things? Because that could be a life-saving discovery, or I could, go outside more, which obviously we should do. I'm trusting what you say here, but how do we balance this? Because we've got these tools now that can look inside us. Should we be looking inside us? Because there's also the risk of false positives, right? So if you could just close us off with a bit of this before we move on to the next subject.
Yeah, I would tell you that if you're an indoor living, silly talking monkey, then I think you should probably do more than less. But if I can convince you to decentralize your life, then I don't think you need any of the tests. I don't even think you need the blood work. And I can tell you, when I started this off 20 years ago, I did blood work. I did all the fancy tests on me all the time, every 3 months. And then I realized after making the changes that I made that wasn't necessary. Now, I can tell you, when I was a neurosurgeon on trauma call all the time, absolutely, I needed to do that. Why? Because that was the wake-up call that I got that my job was killing me. And recently, I just went back in. I unretired and went back into the hospitals to find out really what the lowdown was with COVID. And when I did that, staying up 24/7 for a week straight, that stuff has a huge effect, and you're 40, I'm in my 60s. So this is a way bigger effect. And the point that I'm trying to make to you, I had to have a good reason to go back and do what I did. Why? Because I did not believe a lot of the things that were coming out of the centralized doctors' mouths, the NIH, Fauci, and everybody else. I won't get into that. But suffice to say that, to answer your question fully, I believe if you cannot change the environment that you're in, then I agree that you probably should spend your money on screening tools. But do I think the smarter way to do health is to actually change your environment first, especially your light environment, for the reasons I mentioned to you, then follow it up? That's a different ballgame. And then obviously there's a context. If you came to me and said, hey, well, look, Jack, I'm an alcoholic, I've got cirrhosis, and I've had heart disease and cancer, I'm probably going to do testing on you more frequently than I'm going to do if you told me I'm 40 years old, I used to smoke, I used to drink, I used to do a little cocaine, but, I'm out of that business now. Now I'm doing okay. And, if I did a physical exam on you, a neurologic exam, and a full medical workup, if I didn't find anything, I would say, son, I don't think you need to waste your money doing this.
Okay. That's really helpful. With vitamin D, then, if we can take away the idea of vegetable oils being in there, because I know there are some that do without vegetable oils, maybe different oils. What is your thoughts on vitamin D as a supplement? Obviously, we know natural light is the best thing to do, but if someone's in a minimum wage job, stuck at the wrong, latitude, altitude, all these different things, and they're working crazy hours, they can't get out much. What are your thoughts on the average person taking vitamin D if they can remove the vegetable oil aspect of it?
I'm not a fan at all. And the reason why, it's not just the vegetable oils, it's actually the deuterium content. And many people don't even know that this is an issue in supplements, drugs, and foods. That's the real reason why processed foods and drugs and supplements are a problem for people, is because the deuterium level is really high. So I used to tell people the story that we have a famous researcher that actually is friends with Peter Attia. His name's Dominic D'Agostino. He used to sell these keto snacks. And when people would go through Heathrow, they would get popped by the Homeland Security people because they would pick up the deuterium content in their carry-on bag. And I said, well, look, if they're picking it up with the millimeter wave thing, I said, can you imagine the effect that this is having on your mitochondria? So the answer is no. Now, I will tell you, are there people that I use vitamin D supplements on? Yeah, like some of the people that we just talked about. This is where context matters. So if you're, really sick, have multiple autoimmune conditions and things like that, I may do that before I convince you to get on a Virgin plane to go to the Canary Islands or to go down to Crete or Malta. And the reason for that, this is something you don't understand. I don't even think Peter Attia understands it, but when people take vitamin D pills, what does that do? It raises their LDL cholesterol. So guess what? If he's focusing on that and you're giving something to raise their LDL cholesterol, remember, it changes the lipid profile completely in the body. When you get your vitamin D through the skin the way you're supposed to do it, that doesn't happen. So the better choice for the bloke who's got no money is to go to the pet store and buy a UVB and UVA bulb that they use for reptiles and start treating yourself like a reptile. Why? Because it turns out the UVA story is big for the nitric oxide side, but to make the vitamin D, the UVB is an important part because that's why reptiles and some, animal husbandry shops use that, for chickens and things like that. You can buy those bulbs. I know that the UK and the EU have really dialed back on the use of tanning beds. So the tanning beds that you can get over there are only UVA. So you can't get your UVB to get your vitamin D up. That's an unfortunate issue. So if you are really crafty, do I think you could get a vitamin D bed and alter the motherboard yourself and make a vitamin D bed and do it that way? Yeah. But if not, just go the cheap route. Go to, a Petsco, buy the bulb for, 20 euro and use that 20 minutes, 3 or 4 times a day. That's a way better choice. Obviously, with a bulb, you have to be mindful to protect your eyes, and it's going to be really hard to do a bulb to get your whole body connected. In the United States, we don't have to worry about that because we don't have the same rules that you do. So we have tanning beds that have UVA and UVB. So the answer there would absolutely to be use a tanning bed that has UVA and UVB. And then you have to figure out, okay, based on your Fitzpatrick skin type, like you and me, we're Fitzpatrick ones because we're whiteys from, Northern Europe. The key with that is I have a solar callus, you don't. So I could stay in probably 20, 30, 40 minutes where you'd have to stay in maybe only 5 or 10. And then what we do is we flip you around. And we do that and break it down maybe 2 or 3, 4 treatments, 5, 6, 7 minutes at a time for you to get that done. And just so you know, for the people in the audience listening to this, if you think this is crazy, let me just tell you, there's a guy named Finson who won the Nobel Prize in 1900 for this treatment. And he's a European. Just so you know that. He won the Nobel Prize for the use of artificial light delivering UV light. It was important in rickets and pemphigus vulgaris on the skin. That's why his work was big. That's been buried by the centralized doctors because they don't want you to know that. Why? They would rather sell you the pills that they can make money from. Because remember, the bulb only going to cost you 20 years at a time. But if you stay on the pills all the time, you guys know how much it goes. And then what do? Oh, come back in and let's do your vitamin D level. In other words, you're getting wallet biopsied every single time you go. And what's my 2 cents in this as the decentralized doctor? I want people to spend their money on the things that matter the most, to move the needle the most. That's it right there. Not pills, not drugs, not anything else. I'm a big believer in using it the way we're designed by nature. And do I know that's a little bit inconvenient? Yes. But are there ways around it? I told you the reptile bulb is simple to do. Maybe you can buy, one of the UVA, UVB, and infrared A lights that we now have in the States. One of the companies that makes that is a company named Chroma. Also, EMR Tech makes those lights. I do believe they deliver to Europe. So you can get those lights. And if you can't get them, you can come to the States and buy the light and put it in your carry-on and bring it home. Do I think that's a way better choice? Yeah. Or if one of your friends, if you're a poor bloke, he's going to Disney World, which you probably never want to do. Tell him to pick the light up in Florida and bring it home for you. These things are easy to do. And not only that, you can have that light for your whole life. Then you can share it with your family. That's a great way for you, to biohack high latitude living.
Yeah, no, I love. So we've got a sunbed shop across the road, and if it's only UVA, would you say don't do it, or is there still some benefits to just having a UVA sunbed?
For a guy like you that told me that you got red skin, I would do it. And just so you know, the nitric oxide pulse is good, but this is when you really need to know a little bit about my work, because what does nitric oxide do on hemoglobin? Believe it or not, it makes you more hypoxic. So guess what? This is where your breathing techniques come in. So the fact that you breathe at a lower rate is important. Remember when you said, hey, Rick noticed that the randomness in his HRV went up? That's a good sign. Well, what happens, just for argument's sake, if you take a bloke from the UK and he's got metabolic syndrome, that guy may not be able to do and breathe slower, because if he breathes slower, it's a problem. Or say he's a smoker, like you said, he used to smoke. Everybody in the UK who's a doctor knows that we call these people that have COPD blue puffers. Those are people that have normal lower oxygen tensions and higher CO2 tensions. So guess what? If you change that in him, you're going to have an alien effect. So I'm going to tell you that I'd rather you use both frequencies. So for example, if you use the sunbed across the road, then what I'd like you to do is get the reptile bulb and then maybe do 10 minutes when you get home on different parts. Like for example, if you're having problems on your chest, or say you have psoriasis, say you have eczema, say your kid has atopy or allergies, that is the best indication to use a light. Like, you may be shocked to hear this. There's a book out that's really hard to get in the United States now. Why? Because I've been talking about it for so much. It's a book called Health and Light, and it's written by a guy named John Ott. He's now dead, but this book is only like 120 pages, and I'll tell you what his claim to fame is. He is a photographer that did time-lapse photography for Walt Disney. And back in the 70s, he was in a lot of different movies. But one of the things that he did, he changed light frequencies to see what the effect is on plants, flowers, and then he started doing animals. And he got really famous for an experiment that he did in Sarasota, Florida in 1977. It's called the Sarasota School Experiment, where he basically turned the lights out, put the windows open, let sunlight come in, and he saw the kids' behavior change. They went from ADHD to normal, and then he flipped it around and used the light bulbs that were present, and he saw that their behavior got crazy. But here's the interesting part. There's a disease that you probably have heard of called hyperthyroidism. It's not as common as hypothyroidism is, but these are the people that get their eyes that bug out of their head. So you remember our former president, George H. Bush, that's the older, not George W., that was in cahoots with your prime minister. His wife, Barbara, had hyperthyroidism. John Ott, in the book, showed that fish who also had this issue, when the animal husbandry for the fish put UVA and UVB light on, the eyeball sucked back into the fish's head. The same thing is true with us. So you need to realize that when you have doctors that are paying attention to your real clinical examination, okay, you'll read about other things in this book. This will blow you away. There's a gentleman there was a CEO of a contact factory in Sarasota. He made contacts that allowed UV light to go in it. You saw huge improvements in people's health. So I want you to think a little bit about what you hear from the dermatologists and ophthalmologists in the UK right now. They tell you, oh, UV light's terrible, and they say, well, it doesn't matter. You need to have UV protection for your eyes all the time. Turns out that's not true. This guy showed that you need that 1% to 2% of UV getting through to work on your RPE. That actually controls the size of your globe. It controls the dopamine and melatonin level. And to make this real for your audience, I'm going to tell you something that'll blow your mind. Everybody seems to know about Jordan Peterson and his big addiction with benzodiazepines. Do you know that if you chronically block your eyes from UV and you get too much blue light, that the cycle that works in your eye uses dopamine and melatonin, which both are made from aromatic amino acids that absorb UV light. But if you look at the bottom of my slides that I always post, there's a little neurotransmitter there that benzodiazepines works on called GABA. GABA is actually what is out of whack, and people have benzo addictions that can't get better. So remember, he's got a daughter going around telling people that if you eat this certain diet that you can treat this. It's not true. It's a light-mediated phenomenon. Remember what Jordan Peterson did. He lived in Canada, high latitude like the UK. He was always in front of screens because he was a university professor. And then when you see him do all his programs now, what is he doing? He's doing like what you're doing. So he hasn't really got out of it. So why did it take him a really long time? Because even though he's a rich guy, he was talking to the wrong people who couldn't point out this one slide to show you how this process works in you. So the reason I want people to go buy John Ott's book, this book has been out of print for I don't know how long. When you read what he's found and how many doctors he sent this information to, you know what you'll find out? One of the key big pharma companies that he sent this information to was Pfizer. They basically buried his research. You know why you don't know about the Sarasota school experiment? GE buried the research. You can barely find it on Wikipedia now. So what am I trying to tell you, my young friend? Remember what I said to you before about how light changes the oxidation state of things? See, food doesn't do that, but light does. And you have to remember, the physics of organisms dictates way more than anything in your diet. And the problem is, when you're a guy like Peter Attia or, Daniel Amen, or I don't know who's really popular right now in the UK. Oh, probably Yassine Malhotra. He's a good one to use. They're always focused in on, the diet and exercise stuff, but they never talk about light. And the reason they never talk about light, because when they go to medical school like I did, they have a biochemistry bias. They never learn about light. And what did I do 20 years ago? When I found out how incredibly important light was, I focused in on that Archimedes lever. And then what happened? I became a better doctor. In other words, I left my credentials for the centralized paradigm behind, and I became decentralized. And I began to realize that how important making the proper light choices were in our life. And it moved the needle way more than anything I ever did for my patients back then. So when I do podcasts with guys like you know that Rick is one of my members. You may not know Jack Dorsey is also one of my members. He had a huge problem from tech abuse. He used to own Twitter. He had big time problems. Totally fixed him too. So what am I trying to tell you? Here's a CEO of a tech company. He's now still a tech company CEO. He's able to navigate his problems because he's done better. Now, it's interesting where both of those guys live. They don't live where they used to live when they got sick. That should be a clue that maybe some of the people that are listening to this, hey, maybe living up in Edinburgh is not the best choice. Hey, maybe living in central London isn't the best choice. If you've got a job where, you can do it, say in Mallorca or Cyprus or Malta or the Canary Islands or Tenerife, hey, how about you do that? Because then you're not going to have to get a hose stuck up your butt. You're not going to have to get, a bone density study done. You're not going to have to go and get your bloods done constantly all over time. Why? Because then you're going to find out that there's another way to skin this cat that your experts that you're paying money to aren't even talking to you about. That's really my problem.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Are people generally just healthier than near the equator? Because obviously you've got big food, big pharma, you've got ultra processed foods now, but would you say just generally speaking, the more that we move towards the equator, lifestyle is just better?
Well, no, I wouldn't say that. And I'll tell you the reason why. If you take out a globe and you spin the globe on the equator, you'll notice that there's not a lot of places really to live. Like probably the best place is the top of South America. That's where the equator goes through. So you have a large section of people there. But you'll notice, like, especially in a place like Ecuador, Ecuador has huge mountains at the equator. In Africa, the place that has the best example, and where this does resonate probably for your audience, that's Nairobi. And Nairobi is at 1 degree north, 8,000 feet up in the air. This is the people that are as black can be. They're almost purple. What do you need to know about them? They're the best aerobic scientists and athletes in the world. Why? They go all over the world and win every single marathon. The reason for that? Oxygenation, because they train hypoxic, and they're a huge UV. That's what their skin allows them to do. So when you begin to understand, if you move across the equator in Africa, there's not a lot of places there. And if you take it all the way out, you'll see you're going across the Indian Ocean. When you get into Asia, yeah, there's places in Asia that are also good. Then you come around, like, for example, Guam is at the 13th north latitude, like it's the same as El Salvador. Then you have to go almost 8,000 miles before you get any other landmass. Here's the interesting part. If you look inside the tropics, Tropic of Capricorn and Cancer, the health metrics are radically better than they are outside of it. And how do you know this, that Uncle Jack isn't bullshitting you? Well, let's talk about autoimmunity. Right now, autoimmunity makes up 4% of diseases that centralized medicine takes care of. Back in 1900, it was below 0.01%. It was almost unheard of. The interesting part is almost everybody knows that all autoimmune diseases have a lower incidence at the equator than they do. Do you know what else has the lowest incidence at the equator that is affecting people in Europe? How about type 1 and type 2 diabetes? How do you like that? So that's a disease that never gets talked about, that it mimics like what everybody in Europe knows about MS. If you want to see MS, I famously did a podcast not that long ago where I said, yeah, get off the plane in Amsterdam, and I guarantee you while you're walking to the gate to pick your bags, you'll see 2 or 3 people with MS. And it's true. It happens all the time. People don't understand that not only do you live at high latitude, but it's cloudy all the time. You guys now have cloud seeding. People never go outside. So the incidence of these diseases is now climbing. So let's flip this around. So we'll talk about a disease that you've already brought up. Let's talk about colon cancer. In 1900, in the United States, colon cancer was the 37th cause of death from cancer. Okay? So really, really low down. Like nobody died from it. Okay? Today, it's the number 2 cause of cancer in the United States of death. So let me ask you a question. If you believe Darwin was right, it should say that, small little mutations over time. Tell me why it is in 125 years, it went from 37th to second. I'm going to tell you the reason why. Because Tesla made the power grid with Westinghouse. And now everybody's inside using the wrong color light. And there's studies out there. I went to a meeting in Vermont, 2018, and did a very famous talk. One of the guys that was there is one of these centralized guys like Peter Attia. His name's Zach Bush. Tells everybody to buy my little, pills for your gut, and it'll fix your microbiome. And then there was another researcher named Jeff Leach who did a very interesting study that you'll be interested in. He went to the Hasda in equatorial Africa and gave them Fanta, Snickers bars, high fructose corn syrup, and he actually measured their shit. Actually did this before and after. You know what he found in the people that lived at the equator? Their microbiome didn't change one bit. He also gave them antibiotics, just so you know. Nothing affected their microbiome. But guess what? We have the idea in England, Europe, and the United States that all these things somehow, thin out your microbiome. But yet, Jeff Leach, when he published this in 2018, he actually got on the stage with me and he said, going into this, my hypothesis was these things would be really bad for you. He goes, but in the Hasda tribe, when we did this, he goes, it didn't make a difference at all. So what am I trying to tell you? We're back to the story that I told you in the beginning of this podcast. When you don't put light and light controls into your hypothesis, let me tell you something. Nature has a way of going, poof. That's the key. So if you live at high latitude Europe, yeah, that's why I told you. Stick the black hose up your behind with the NIH, because you're probably going to have a problem because your belly never sees the sun. But guess what? If you live with the Hasda, I'm not worried about you at all.
Yeah. Yeah. If somebody came to you, and this obviously is going to be a really hard question to answer, but they said, look, Jack, I've got cancer. Should I go through chemotherapy? And I know you're going to say what type of cancers and what they're, how far along, but what?
I'll give you the answer. I
Sure.
can give you the answer simply. I would tell you, you can do the centralized treatments, whatever they're going to put you on. But then you come to me and I'm going to put you on deuterium depleted water. I'm actually going to use light therapy on you and some other things after I examine you. And then we'll have you go back to the cancer doctors. And when things start moving and the needle gets better, you know what the cancer doctors are going to say, right? Oh, well, it was the drugs. Okay. Turns out it wasn't the drugs. And the thing is, when you get people, and I've got people here right now in El Salvador from Europe that were told they were going to die if they didn't have the surgery, they're still alive. And ironically, one of my members is going back to see her doctor to have new tests done to find out what's going on. The answer is no, I'm okay with you staying on the standard treatments because the standard treatments don't have a bias towards the biophysics. Mine does. In other words, all that stuff, all of it's poison. So what is it designed to do? Their idea is to kill just the dead cell. What they don't understand, and this is what I want you to understand, that event that we talked about in the beginning of this podcast, the great oxygenation event, it's a very interesting event. So one of the things that's always flummoxed Nick Lane is how we took bacteria and archaea and put it together to make eukaryotes. That's what we are. And it turns out this happened when this great oxygenation event's coming. But here's the interesting thing with bacteria and archaea. They never innovated heme proteins. And it turns out heme proteins are what protect you from oxygen. So when we started pumping oxygen in from cyanobacteria in the oceans, that was the fusion event. That's the first cancer that actually really happens on Earth. And the funny thing is, when I say this to guys like Nick Lane, when I say it to Martin Picard, when I say it to Michael Levin, these are all big researchers, in the bioelectricity space, their heads kind of explode because their science has no answer for how this happens. But my science does. And here's the interesting thing. Every single eukaryote, which is me and you talking here, have that protein, heme protein called CCO. It's called cytochrome C oxidase. What does it do? It makes deuterium depleted water to wrap that 30 million volt charge. But here's the big one. It makes the antidote for cancer. What is that? It's called apoptosis. So when the cell is really bad, apoptosis comes and takes the cell out. In other words, it's bye-bye. And there's two pathways. One, intrinsic, because the light that we make in there is being sensed by the mitochondria. Here's the other one, the extrinsic one. So that means if another mitochondria is adjacent to this cancerous one, it takes it out. In other words, you've got friends, okay? So believe it or not, you have oncologists inside of you, but guess what the key is? You have to get UV and infrared light in order for that oncologist inside of you to work. And guess what? All of you guys in the UK and Europe, you ain't doing that. What did you tell me earlier? Jack, I had this fancy panel done and my vitamin D was in the shitter. Got it? So guess what? Why did I tell you, okay, I'm going to stick the black snake up your behind? There's your answer. Because what do I know that you don't know? What do I know that Peter Attia doesn't know? What do I know that nobody in the NHN seems to know? What that great oxygenation event really means. That you have to have that oxygen protection scheme in there so that your cells don't go back to primitive forms. What do we call that in medicine? We call that cancer. Okay? That's the reason modern humans get it. And guess what happens? When you put them in an environment where the UV and IR light's there, you are going to renovate your heme proteins. You're going to renovate your melanin from the UV light. Those are the two things that regenerate mammals. That's the reason why seeing cancer in a wild animal in Africa is almost unheard of. And if you don't believe me on this, in John Ott's book, he wrote something incredible. He had a discussion with Albert Schweitzer's daughter. Remember, Albert Schweitzer's a doctor from the United States at the turn of the 19th and 20th century. Never saw any cancer in anybody in Africa. You know when the first time they started to see it? Was when they gave the natives sunglasses. As soon as they put sunglasses on them, they started to see heart disease and cancer and peripheral artery disease. So this is in John Ott's book that's published in the 1960s. You and I now are talking on your podcast in 2025. You tell me anybody from the NHS has ever told anybody in the UK what I just told you. You understand now why I want you to go buy that book if you can find it, because you're going to see a world where a guy wasn't canceled for using light. And remember, he wasn't using sunlight. He's using different frequencies of light to show you the effect on plants, animals, humans, and it's stunning. At the same time, he never realized there was a physicist, very famous at the time, named Fritz Popp in the 1960s in Europe, who built this machine called the photomultiplier, and he put all living things in it. And guess what he found? We create light from our mitochondria inside of us. And it turned out, when you use all the different pathways, you make different light. And it turned out, what's the healthiest light? Ultra weak UV light, the light that the dermatologist and the eye doctors tell you is bad for you. So you got to stop and go, wait a minute. Whether you believe in God or evolution, here's the come to Jesus moment. How can cells that are healthy make ultra weak UV light if it's bad for us? The answer is you've been bullshitted for a really long time. And the reason why is because, remember, if they block you from the UV and IR light, incentives dictate the outcomes. In other words, you're going to come in and get the black snake in your behind. You're going to come in and get your prescriptions for statins and your prescriptions for vitamin D. And guess what? You're going to go on your merry way to the coal mine. Well, you don't even do that anymore in Europe. But you're going to go wherever you're going to go, to the bank, and you're not going to think the less of it. Why? Because nobody for the last 70 years has told you the truth in the UK, in Europe, or in the United States. Now, I will tell you, that's beginning to change a little bit in the United States. Why? That has to do with the last, big experiment that we've all went through together over the last 5 years. There's a lot less trust for centralized institutions across the board. And what do I teach my tribe? Kind of when you ask me the questions about what's the difference between centralized and decentralized MDs. I think in my first podcast with you, I laid that case out when I used coming right off the Prague stage in Bitcoin, when I talked about Steve Jobs, when I talked about Paul Allen, when I talked about Hal Finney. These are all three big technologists that all died from cancers, from different ones. And I'm like, what good is being a billionaire if you're dead? So what am I trying to teach the bloke that you asked me about, who's got no money? If you can't get to Tenerife, if you can't get to Mallorca, you don't have the money, I know that you can spend 20 quid, go buying a goddamn bulb, and stop drinking Starbucks coffee, stop eating, fish and chips, and buy the bulb instead, and get your vitamin D up. In other words, get some of the UV and IR, because if you want to know what the regenerative current is for every disease known to man, it's a combination of those two. And that's what renovates your heme proteins. That's what renovates your melanin. That's the reason why when you went in the sun in Mexico, you got red and didn't. And that's the reason I don't. Because both of those proteins in me have been upregulated. Why? Because of the decentralized science that I'm trying to teach you. And the more that you imbibe it, the more, this is what I like to tell people. 20 years ago, Jack Kruse was crazy on the internet. Okay? That's what I heard. Every year since that time, I've gotten less crazy. And the people that are on the other side, their advice has gotten so bad that people don't listen to them. But the funny thing is nobody tells them they're crazy. Like, guess what? You want to know the truth? They are batshit crazy. And not only that, they're doing it for a good reason, because that's how they make money. Incentives dictate the outcomes. And until people begin to wake up to really how the world really works, this is operational everywhere, not just in healthcare, everywhere. I want people to become savages, to question authority. Like, I love coming on doing podcasts like this when you want to compare me to someone else, or you want to compare this idea to that idea and why we should be doing what we're doing. I love doing that because I know there's going to be 1, 2, maybe 10 people in the audience are going to go, what he's saying is kind of interesting. And I've never thought about it from this perspective. you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to give crazy a try because I've already done it the way the NHS has told me to do. And I keep getting this thing stuck up my behind. They keep giving me prescriptions. And guess what? My blood pressure is still high. I still have fatty liver disease. You know, I'm not, my penis doesn't work. I don't want to take Cialis anymore. You know, my wife doesn't like me. Whatever the answer is, you get a different perspective. And you remember that famous guy that had the funny hair and Burn, what he said about insanity. If you keep doing the same thing over and over again, that's insanity. And what I'm trying to tell you is turn off the channel on centralized medicine, turn on the channel for decentralized medicine, and I'll tell you what, I'll make this challenge to anybody in your audience. In 3 to 6 months, you'll come back and say, I cannot believe it. And then you're going to say to me, what's the next level to this? What's the next level? What's the next level? Then guess what? After a period of time, then I've got 150,000 savages in the UK. I got 150,000 savages in the EU. And just so you know, the last time you and I talked, it was a week after the Prague event. Just so you know, I got invited to go back to the Prague event. And it turns out, my opinion, the reason why that's the case is remember who the people in Czechoslovakia were. They were the people that used to be the Eastern Bloc, the communists. They know better than any European to question centralized authority. Why? Because they lived through it once. And they're like, we're not doing that again. And I didn't realize that until I came home from that event. That's why when you caught me the first time, it was right after that event. And I thought to myself, well, that'll be the last time I go to Europe. But when Matthias asked me to come back, he said, look, dude, everybody really liked your talk. It got me thinking about, you know, what's going on in the world right now, you know, with the global elitists and the centralization idea. And I do think everybody now is at least willing to listen to the decentralized idea. Why? Because I think they know what they're going to get from centralization. And in my opinion, I think that's important.
Last time you left us with a sentiment which was never miss a sunrise. So do you want to finish with that, or is there a different thing you'd like to leave us with this time?
Yeah, well, I would tell you, you could do the same thing. I always tell people where this acronym comes from is you make like the Sphinx, grounded, look to the east every morning, try to do as much as you can. The longer you do, the better. But if you've got a medical condition, like some of the conditions that you talked about on this podcast, then think about using the hour or two before sunset too, because that's also red light. So that's a good thing to do. And then to get to the last issue, I always tell people to eat like a great white shark. What's the reason for that? The reason for that is because when your oxidation is shifted to +3, just light alone raises your blood sugar and your insulin level. You may not know that. So if you don't eat carbohydrates, you eat like a great white shark, you're offsetting that aerobic glycolysis shift so that hopefully you don't get a cancer. So you don't have to get the black snake in your behind from the gastroenterologist, or you don't have to go see the ENT doctor because, you know, you have vocal cord polyps and you're worried about having cancer there, or hypothyroidism that can turn into thyroid cancer. Those are the reasons why that advice is there. And I don't think you have to be a brain surgeon or a rocket scientist to remember, make like the Sphinx and eat like a great white shark. So those things bring more red light, more UV into your life, and it protects the fuel sources. Why? Because you're already making a ton of glucose from the light that you live in. So you don't need any more.
Beautiful. Dr. Jack, an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing this with our audience. We really appreciate you and everything you're doing, and please don't stop and keep spreading all this information. So yeah, appreciate you so much, and thank you for your time.
No problem.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Jack. That's part 2. If you haven't seen part 1, go and watch part 1. And if you haven't done so already, grab our 7 breathing exercises guide. These are beautifully, professionally recorded in a studio exercises to improve heart rate variability, help you get deeper sleep, reduce stress, all the good stuff. The link's down below. And then after you've signed up, you'll see a little video from me saying, hey, do you want some coaching? Would you be interested in working with us? If that is a potential, then you can click and you can book a call in with my team. And if you're anything like me, after that podcast, probably the next thing you want to do is just get outside. And I have to say, in the month or so since I recorded that second podcast, I feel completely transformed. I really mean this. Like, I've got colour on my skin finally. I'm outside. I've got a standing desk here, which I use outside now as well, which is incredible. So I'm working outside as much as I can. My sleep is better, my energy is better. So I highly recommend get outside, get your shirt off, have some fun. And if you've enjoyed this, subscribe. We've got loads of other beautiful conversations coming up and loads of stuff in the catalogue. All right, thank you so much. Speak to you soon. Cheers.